North Carolina is becoming one of the fastest growing data center markets in America, and most residents have no idea how dramatically this could change the state. Some experts now warn that the AI-driven data center boom could become one of the largest infrastructure and energy challenges North Carolina has faced in decades. And the biggest question is this: will residents benefit from this boom, or will they pay for it? So why North Carolina? The reasons are simple: power, infrastructure, and cost. Northern Virginia, currently the largest data center market in the world, is facing grid congestion, power shortages, and local opposition to continued expansion. So developers are moving south, and North Carolina is one of the biggest targets. Duke Energy says it now has agreements tied to more than 7.6 gigawatts of future data center demand in the Carolinas. That number is difficult to comprehend, as 1 gigawatt can power roughly 750,000 homes. That means planned data center demand in the region could eventually require electricity comparable to several million homes. And given how critical the power grids are to these data centers, grid capacity and reliability are major factors. Duke Energy has much more grid capacity than many other states, allowing data centers to get started quickly without having to wait for the major grid updates. North Carolina also has cheaper and more available land than Northern Virginia. Large data centers require massive plots of land, think hundreds of acres, and North Carolina has plenty of rural land still available while maintaining a strong fiber connectivity network. And the most important factor is cost. Despite what many may feel in North Carolina, Duke Energy's rates are below the national average, which results in massive savings. And combine that with North Carolina's aggressive tax incentives, and you can see why developers are targeting North Carolina. So now the question: do we want data centers? Will these data centers benefit, or will they harm residents? Let's look at the facts, and we will start with the hottest topic: impacts to the power grid, and the biggest question: who pays? But before we get into this, if you are looking to relocate to the Raleigh area, our team specializes in relocation, and we would love to help you. And despite the negatives you will hear in this video, Raleigh will continue to remain one of the top places to move in the country. Okay, so data centers are not normal buildings. They are industrial scale energy and cooling facilities operating 24 hours a day. A single hyperscale data center can require between 100 and 500 megawatts of electricity continuously. Unlike neighborhoods or businesses that fluctuate power demand throughout the day and night, data centers consume power constantly, 24 hours a day, every second of the year, and this creates major stress on the power grid. We said before that Duke Energy has over 7 gigawatts of future data center demand in the Carolinas. And for comparison, the entire output of the nearby Sharon Harris nuclear power plant is 1 gigawatt. So we are talking about the equivalent 7 nuclear power plants worth of power, which equates to over 5 million homes. Duke Energy has warned that rising data center demand is one of the primary reasons it may need to expand natural gas generation and delay some fossil fuel plant retirements. So environmentally, this will directly impact Duke Energy's planned transition away from fossil fuels and will likely force utilities to start looking into building more nuclear power. And here's the biggest question on residents' minds: with increased power generation costs and associated grid upgrade requirements, will residents end up footing the bill for these data centers? And the answer is both yes and no. Directly, you won't pay for the initial install and any associated power grid upgrades. The utility and the data center work this out with combinations of major upfront investments and cost recovery mechanisms in the data center's monthly bills. But here is where it gets hazy. What if grid updates and new power plants aren't required initially for a large data center? Maybe it just pushes it right up to, but not over, the limits of needing upgrades. But then a few large shopping centers or neighborhoods are built in the area and finally push the power consumption over the edge to need massive upgrades. Who pays? This is what utilities are currently trying to figure out, because right now residents will pay for those indirect costs through increased future energy rates. Researchers from NC State and Carnegie Mellon estimated that rapid data center growth could contribute to electricity price increases averaging around 8% nationally by 2030. And for North Carolina, that could be much higher if nothing changes. And there's another problem: grid reliability. Large data center clusters can destabilize local transmission systems because their power demand is so concentrated. With the grids having a much higher utilization now, what happens when we have a major heat wave in the summer or a massive cold front in the winter? While the utilities have strict requirements to maintain reserve capacities to avoid this, sometimes situations are inevitable, as some of us may have seen a few Christmas Eves ago in the area where Duke Energy had to have rolling outages when the temperatures plummeted. And if you have to shut loads off, who would you shut off? Residents who each pay much less than $1 per hour, or a large-scale data center who consistently pay pays nearly $100,000 per hour. I'll let you decide on that one. Now let's move into a lesser discussed but equally important topic, water consumption. Data centers generate enormous amounts of heat and cooling that hardware requires massive quantities of water. Think about how hot just your computer at home gets from running continuously. Now think of millions of those together. And that leads to large hyperscale data centers consuming millions of gallons of water per day for cooling. Microsoft disclosed that some of its global data center operations consumed over 6.4 million cubic meters of water in a single year, more than 1.6 billion gallons. That's equivalent to the water usage of the entire town of Wake Forest annually. And North Carolina residents are increasingly worried about what this means for its water supply during droughts and population growth. And this is especially concerning as we find ourselves in a drought with water restrictions right now. So who gets prioritized? Well, residents have to face much stricter and longer restrictions. Water systems may require expensive expansion projects to support these facilities. And again, residents often help pay for those upgrades through taxes or utility rate increases. Now let's talk about one of the least discussed impacts, heat. Data centers produce extraordinary amounts of waste heat. Thousands of high-performance servers running continuously create thermal output on an industrial scale. Some researchers and environmental groups warn that concentrated data center development can intensify local urban heat island effects, especially when clusters of facilities are built near one another. This is the same concept as when people talk about new clear-cut development that is filled with concrete and asphalt surfaces. The rise in temperatures around those areas is a real phenomenon. In dense data center regions globally, residents have reported measurable increases in ambient temperatures near industrial campuses. This may be a good thing for colder climates, but in warmer climates like North Carolina, we don't need any more heat in the summer. But this has large implications, and it becomes a feedback loop. More servers create more heat. More heat requires more cooling. More cooling requires more electricity. More electricity generation creates more emissions and thermal output. And in rapidly growing suburban and rural areas of North Carolina, this could fundamentally reshape local environmental conditions over time. Another issue rarely discussed is noise pollution. Large cooling systems, backup generators, transformers, and industrial ventilation systems operate continuously. Residents living near major data center campuses in other states have reported persistent low-frequency humming 24 hours a day. Backup generator testing is loud and it occurs regularly. And because many facilities are built in previously rural or semi-rural areas, the environmental contrast can be dramatic. Communities that once dealt with farms and forests suddenly face industrial-scale utility infrastructure. And speaking of land, data centers also consume enormous amounts of it. Modern hyperscale campuses can span hundreds of acres. That means forests cleared, wetlands altered, farmland converted into industrial infrastructure. And unlike traditional manufacturing plants that create large employment bases, many data centers employ relatively few permanent workers once construction is complete. Some facilities costing billions of dollars may ultimately employ fewer than 100 long-term operational staff. And these data centers are taking some of North Carolina's prime industrial sites that have historically been saved for developers like VinFast or Toyota's new electric car plants that employ thousands, thus feeding back into the economy. So these are some pretty major negatives. There has to be something in this for the residents, right? The construction phase alone creates thousands of jobs for electricians, contractors, engineers, and infrastructure workers. Billions of dollars flow into the local economies during development, which helps everyone for several years of construction. Data centers also expand local tax bases, and despite the fact they are getting major tax incentive to build in North Carolina, the net increase in taxes is massive. This can transform formerly rural areas through a major infusion of tax dollars to support things like schools, roads, and emergency services. Another common question, if I have a data center nearby, will I have better AI experience? One thing you will benefit from is fiber connectivity, as high-speed fiber networks are obviously critical for data centers, so if you live by one, you should have really good internet options. But as far as the AI experience, you won't get better results, but you may get them slightly faster due to less latency issues. But for the vast majority of people, you won't notice the difference here. There's also a long-term energy argument. Because tech companies need enormous amounts of electricity, they are increasingly investing directly into renewable energy, battery storage, nuclear development, and grid modernization. Some analysts believe AI infrastructure demand could accelerate clean energy deployment faster than would have happened otherwise. So there are a lot of different factors at play here, and the negatives definitely seem to outweigh the positives on on the surface. This is why you are seeing so many towns and counties putting in place temporary pauses on data center development to allow them to catch up with regulations that help protect its residents and the environment if data centers decide to build there. What do you think? Are you excited for North Carolina's data center boom? Or are you worried about what's to come? Let me know in the comments. And to learn more about the Raleigh area as a whole, make sure to download our free relocation guide and check out some of our other videos to learn more about the area. Thank you for watching.